I believe if some of our modern gurus could understand what Brahmacharya actually means, we would not have some of our great gurus behind the bars today. In fact, some of our so-called great and revered yoga gurus have given a bad reputation to the field of yoga. Some of our gurus need to follow the yamas, that is Brahmacharya. Well, before the hashtag #MeToo, the world of 21st century yoga has been roiled by high-profile cases of sexual harassment and abuse. Today, in this video, we will delve deeper into the yama, that is Brahmacharya. By far, this has been the trickiest yama to understand. Definitions of what it means vary widely, from total celibacy at one end, that's the traditional approach, to the application of moderation towards all sensory experiences at the other. Brahmacharya is a concept within Indian religions that literally means to stay in conduct with one's own self. In yoga, especially in Hinduism and Jainism, it generally refers to a lifestyle characterized by sexual continence or complete abstinence. Brahmacharya is somewhat different from the English term celibacy, which merely means non-indulgence in sexual activity. Brahmacharya is when a person completely controls his body and mind through ascetic means. In the Hindu, that is Jain and Buddhist monastic traditions, a Brahmacharya implies, among other things, the mandatory renunciation of sex and marriage. It is considered necessary for a monk's spiritual practice. Patanjali laid out what is known as the eight-limbed path in Yoga Sutras to specify 8 distinct steps to follow in order to reach samadhi or enlightenment. The yamas, that is also known as your ethical restraints, are the first step on that path. And there are 5 separate yamas. We have previously explored the first yama, that is ahimsa or non-violence. The second yama, that is satya or truthfulness. And the third yama, that is asteya, that is or non-stealing. So Brahma literally means the divine consciousness. And charya in this context means living or one who is established in it. A literal definition of the fourth yama becomes not celibacy nor moderation, but being established in divine consciousness, or being established in the higher form of the mind, or even walking with God. In a narrow sense, Brahmacharya is understood to be the practice of celibacy or sexual abstinence. In wider sense, it is to keep the mind always engaged in thoughts of the Brahma or the supreme consciousness. The word Brahmacharya consists of 2 words, Brahma and Charya. Brahma means the supreme consciousness, and Char in Sanskrit means to move on. So Brahmacharya means to move towards the supreme consciousness, or simply to always keep God in one's mind while performing every action. Some people say that preserving or not wasting a single drop of semen is Brahmacharya. Actually, what they say is contradicted by science. The food we take turns into fluids. Fluids turn into blood. Blood is converted into bone marrow, and bone marrow turn into semen. It is the result of a long biological process and therefore the most valuable component of our body. But the excess of this fluid, which the body cannot use naturally, is ejected in some way after a specific period of time. So it is impossible or unnatural to preserve every drop. But it plays a great role in our life. By following yamas and niyamas and practicing spiritual contemplation, we can control it and use it to improve our health and develop high thinking. Does Brahmacharya mean celibacy? Although sex and procreation are at the very basis of life, in many religious traditions, celibacy is often considered a prerequisite for deep spiritual fulfillment. Many equate Brahmacharya to no sexual activity or spotless chastity. In ancient classical texts on Hinduism, Brahmacharya is used to refer to the first of the four phases of life. Before marriage, when students went to live and study with a spiritual teacher in the ashram or gurukul, practicing a life of strict celibacy was deemed necessary in these circumstances in order to focus on studies and learning the tools for self-realization. Later, one entered family life, that is known as grahasthi ashram, and naturally sex was a part of it. Maharishi Patanjali recommended the 5 yamas as universal concepts and absolute values for the harmonious and sustainable growth of society and mankind in general. If generations, societies, and cultures at large want to adopt Brahmacharya as a way of living, equating the interpretation of Brahmacharya as sexual abstinence is misleading and very limiting. Gurudev Sri Ravi Shankar explains that when the mind is focused on divinity, there is no possessiveness, there is no lust, there is no greed. None of these negative impressions cloud the mind. That is exactly what it means. Abstinence is a result of this. It is a part of it. He explains this with a simple example. When you have an examination or something very important to do, when your mind is in that, then the mind is not going to any part of the body or focusing on some fascination or sex. You are busy. Your mind is moving towards something bigger. According to Patanjali, sexual abstinence helps to keep your mind and body pure on the spiritual path. Historically, yogis lived ascetics and renounced their life as householders to go live the life of a recluse, typically in complete isolation in the caves of the Himalayas or the jungle. The men, because of that time, only men were permitted to practice yoga, would literally hold funerals for themselves to symbolically end their lives as they knew them and burn all their worldly possessions. They would then take internal vows like the vows of celibacy to practice yoga and go off to live a life of isolation. To them, practicing meditation to get closer and closer to the divine was more important than anything else. and they could not be distracted by their impure bodies or worldly pleasures. Thus, celibacy was a natural practice in their lifestyle. But most modern yogis don't love the idea of giving up their everyday lives to live in isolation. Most modern yogis prefer to live as householders and have partners and families. T. Krishnamacharya, B.K.S. Iyengar, T.K.V. Desikachar, and Pattabhi Joyce are few teachers. None of these men were sannyasis, but instead were householders who married and had several children. They lived and practiced yoga in the world rather than turning away from it. They did not share Patanjali's strict interpretation of Brahmacharya as abstinence. So, a very modern interpretation of this yama has been explained as sexual restraint. Unmarried and married both can attain enlightenment. Bliss comes from inside, rather male or female partner. King Janaka, Guru Nanak Deva, Sant Kabir, etc. attained enlightenment in married life. As yoga teachers, the path of Brahmacharya is very challenging. It's very easy to slip over. You need to be careful as a yoga teacher. In this interpretation of Brahmacharya, yogis are encouraged to have only one loving, committed partner and to regard the exchange of sexual energy as something sacred. Of course, this interpretation greatly differs from Patanjali's intended meaning, but is definitely more fitting to the lifestyle of a modern yogi. Of course, to practice this principle in its traditional sense, you need to practice complete abstinence from all sexual activity. This means no contact of any kind with others who are sexually attracted to, or even any thoughts about sexual activity. The idea behind this principle is to focus all of your energy on the divine rather than focusing on impurities of this body or this world. To practice the more modern interpretation of Brahmacharya, you obviously can't sleep around. Instead, you need to consider sexual contact and energy to be sacred and only exchange that sexual energy with one monogamous partner. Again, of course, this is not a traditional interpretation of Brahmacharya, but it is a modern view of how a householder can practice this yama. But remember that traditionally in this classical yoga era of Patanjali, householders were not yogis. In my own life, I have seen this most clearly in my obsession over making my relationship work. Suddenly, I'm able to devote myself wholeheartedly to my yoga practice again. It's such a relief to realize that I don't have to control the relationship. All I need to do is stay open, loving, and present. Letting go has also freed me to observe other things that can sap my energy. Friends, Brahmacharya is the vow of celibacy in thoughts, words, and deeds. How did Hanuman become a Mahavir, the most brave? It is with this weapon of Brahmacharya that he acquired unsurpassable strength and valor. The valor and greatness of Emperor Prithviraj was due to the strength of Brahmacharya. The great Bhishma, the grandfather of Pandavas and Kauravas, conquered death by Brahmacharya. In the next video, we will discuss about aparigraha and what does it mean. Till then, take care. Keep smiling. Namaste.